Hello. So this is note 16, a continuation. Flip the screen. Whoop. So in the last video, we're looking at this and how water is really good at dissolving certain types of things. It's good at dissolving ionic compounds because of the IMF dipole-dipole. It's also good at dissolving polar substances because of dipole-dipole interactions. And this has led a lot of people to come up with this phrase, like dissolves like. And at first, when I first heard it when I was your age, it sounded to me like someone from California, the California girls that like use like all like the time. And like I didn't understand like what it was like saying. But what it's actually meaning with like dissolves like is basically that polar substances can dissolve in polar substances. Non-polar stuff dissolves in non-polar solvents. So if I'm sitting here going like, could I take, I don't know, could I mix together methanol? Ooh, look, wow, that was a really good one to come up with because see, it's actually the example down here that I typed up. Decide whether liquid hexane or liquid methanol is more appropriate solvent for the substances grease versus potassium iodide. So I have a glass of liquid hexane. Liquid hexane is kind of like gasoline, except for gasoline is octane instead of hexane. And this apparently is C6H14. And we also have a solvent over here. Our choices were hexane and methanol. Methanol is the one that makes you go blind and you have to drink a bunch of ethanol, get really, really drunk in order to not go blind. And I'm gonna draw methanol for you, CH3OH. We're going to, let's see, carbon likes to make 4 bonds, always, always. So carbon, 3 hydrogens, okay. Then an oxygen, oxygen likes to make 2 bonds and has 2 lone pairs. And hexane, I don't really know how to draw that, but I'm not super worried about it. It's just a bunch of carbons and hydrogens together. I'm noticing right away, carbons, hydrogens, carbons, hydrogens. No matter how I connect my carbons and my hydrogens, carbon-hydrogen bonds are non-polar, always. So no matter how these are connected, this is a non-polar substance here. Methanol is polar, and I'm getting that remembering that the 3 most electronegative elements were fluorine is like super, super king electronegative, the most electronegative, then oxygen, then nitrogen. So for sure, this oxygen is pulling the electrons towards him. And actually, if I was to draw this more accurately, my picture would have looked something like this with the correct bond angles. I just didn't, think about it. So I've got this electronegative, and here is our partial negative. The other sides would be partial positive. So yeah, this is a polar molecule. Things that should dissolve in hexane are going to be non-polar. Things that dissolve in methanol will be polar or ionic. So I got that, I drew that, I drew that. We're trying to see whether grease or potassium iodide, which one is going to dissolve in these two solvents. I'm looking at this again. Hydrogen, carbon, carbohydrogen, that's non-polar. I don't care how that's connected. Grease, oils, stuff like that, fats, non-polar, non-polar dissolves into non-polar. If I put grease and methanol, it would be like the oil and water situation where they don't mix. Potassium iodide is an ionic compound. Ionic compounds or polar compounds dissolve into polar. If you understand the rule, non-polar dissolves non-polar, ionic and polar dissolve into polar, then you're good. But the problem is that a lot of textbooks and teachers will teach it by saying, oh yeah, like dissolves like dissolves like dissolves like dissolves like dissolves like. And then students write it on their test, and then something like this happens. Whoa, how'd you get like that? He's like, he's got like a 6-pack like me. And AP College Board logo. Every time a student loses a point because they said like dissolves like, I do 1 push-up. He's like, holy shiz. So just writing like dissolves like does not get you a point. So on the question down here, if you were like, on this question down here, if you put for your answer, hexane dissolves grease because like dissolves like, you would miss a point. You're not wrong, but you didn't actually explain what was going on. You just tried to use some like cool catchphrase. It'd be like saying, how do you do this math problem? And you'd be like, oh, you just do PEMDAS. You're not wrong. You do want to do PEMDAS, parentheses, exponents, whatever, but you didn't explain what PEMDAS was, so I don't know that you know it. You're just using a catchphrase. So keep that in mind. I wouldn't necessarily get too accustomed to that phrase, but it's used a lot, especially in college chemistry.